Welcome to the channel, friends. So today's video is going to be covering a quick test that I've been wanting to do for a while now. And I want to compare the readings I get from these commonly sourced ethanol, percent content testers against my GM flex fuel sensor and what the car reads. So what I'm going to do is a quick test. I'm going to take a sampling of the fuel inside the vehicle right now, which is at about E72, and then see if it correlates and biases with each one of these different bottles here. So I have a REV-X, which is a commonly found bottle, and then I have this other one here, which I kind of like because it has a wide mouth, and the fill line at the top is not right up against the top here like on the REV-X. Okay, so if you look at here on the REV-X, the line for the gasoline fill line is right at the top near the radius, the inside radius of the bottle. And the surface tension of the fluid kind of like acts funny up here when you fill it up all the way. Over here we have the fill line kind of like, lower in the tube, so you don't have that like weird interaction between the inside of the bottle, that radius on the inside, causing the surface tension to like kind of like flow up against the walls of the inside of the bottle. And I kind of like this one because it's a wide mouth, and like I said, it has the fill line further down on the tube where it's a straight wall. So let's go take a look at the car and I'll show you the details, and then we'll take a look at what the content is in the car right now and go from there. Alright guys, so here is my C6 ZR1, over 1,000 wheel, 960 something torque at the wheels SAE. And as you can see, I got some Forge line wheels, got an 18 in the rear Toyo R, and in the front I run a 19. Super nice wheels. I have to show these wheels off because they're so gorgeous. But anyways, let's get to the flex fuel sensor. Okay, like I said, the car's over 1,000 wheel, 960 something wheel torque SAE, and it's done up right. Okay, so I built the car myself, did flex fuel on it, custom fuel kit, Ford Innovations return style fuel system, and I have my flex fuel sensor right underneath here, underneath the regulator. Okay, maybe you guys can see that. Okay, it's a GM flex fuel AC Delco type sensor, and that's where I have it located. Custom mount for the regulator that I made myself, all fabricated. A lot of stuff on this car is custom, but I have to show you guys the engine bay. If you're asking why I have all this gold wrap on everything, well, that's a functional thing, not an aesthetic thing. Okay, the more expensive and nicer material is actually gold colored versus something else. I would prefer black or some other, subtle color, but that's just the way it is. Okay, and I have a ice tank over there, so I have all those lines isolated from engine bay heat. That's why I have everything wrapped. The tank is actually double insulated with foam and then covered with those nice sheets of DEI material, okay, to keep the engine bay heat away from the intercooler system. But this is the car, C6 ZR1. Let's take a look at the dash logic and see what I'm reading for ethanol. That way we get a baseline number and we can compare it to the bottles. Alright, so I want to show you guys on this side of the car how I drain my fuel extremely easily using this hose and adapter. The adapter comes with this Injector Dynamics complete fuel system filter. This is a can style filter that allows you to drop the can just like an oil filter to check your filter media, which is a your standard kind of like filter element. But it has this nifty Schrader valve here, which allows you to drain the fuel and also test your fuel extremely quickly by just hooking up a hose with the adapter that comes provided. Okay, it works extremely slick, no mess, no fuss, super slick setup. I really like this unit right here. As you can see, I kind of like set it up so it's really convenient for me to work from right over the fender here into a bucket or a pail or a a race jug, whatever it is I'm using to transfer fuel. But as you can see, closer shot of that intercooler tank, double insulated, wrapped lines all the way to the front bumper. I'm going to do an update video when it comes to engine-based stuff. So I've done some stuff over the years, the past couple years, to improve the engine bay, appearance and aesthetics. And I'm going to go over my newly updated setup on this car, but I'm not going to do it in this video, obviously. Alright, so we're inside the cab of the vehicle. Let's take a look at what the dash logic gives us. Not sure if you can see that, but it says E72. Okay, so that's what it's been ever since I filled up with the car. I did, however, when I first filled up at the pump, I filled it in my truck with a bunch of 5-gallon metal pails, my old X98 jugs. This stuff is Pump E. Okay, so I'm using Pump E in this, which is reading out when I first got it at, it was, the highest I could get it was E83, okay? But that's another thing I want to talk about when I get in the workshop, and I want to discuss something. It started off as E83, but now when I put it in the car, it's E72. So is that because of some kind of contamination? There's still some leftover 93 fuel inside my fuel tanks, okay? The stock fuel tanks, because there's dual tanks on this car, left and right. So because of that, maybe there's some contamination which caused the ethanol percentage to drop. That's something we're gonna find out, because essentially if this is 72 and then the bottles tell me 72, that means that there was definitely some fuel contamination, and I have to do a better job of flushing out. Even though I completely drain the tanks using my method, which is running the pumps till they sound like they're dry and then completely cut them off, it probably doesn't get all the fuel that's in the tanks at the very bottom. So that's what I have a suspicion is causing it going from a tested at the pump E83 down to E72 when it's finally in the car circulating inside the fuel system. All right, so let's go take a look at the bottles and see what this content tests at and how it biases up against the actual ethanol flex fuel sensor in the car. And like I said, I'll do another video covering the car, all the interior and exterior upgrades. I know people are going to have questions, but let's just get on with this video and let's go check it out. All right, so something I noticed when using these bottle testers is that some people say they're not accurate, okay? And I think the main reason why people say they possibly aren't accurate is because of where do you fill the water line and where do you fill the gasoline line, okay? So the line themselves have a thickness. And what I'm trying to say here is I noticed that if I fill to the bottom of the line, okay, versus the top of the line, or if I fill it to the top of the water line and then I fill it to the bottom of the gasoline line, is that accurate? No, it's not, because if you ask, in my humble opinion, if you're filling the water to the top of the water line because it has a thickness, it's either you got to start at the bottom or start at the top, or if you start in the middle of the line, it doesn't matter. You have to end with the same amount, okay, for this scale to be accurate. This is a scale, essentially. If this is calibrated correctly and the bottles work as they should, okay, so you start on the top of the water line, you have to end with filling to the top of the gasoline line, okay? So I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to say here. Basically, your start and end point have to be exactly the same, and that will affect your reading, because it did. I did a test, and I will show pictures of this. I filled to the bottom of this line versus the top of it, and then you get almost like a 3 to 4 count difference. So I got from basically E80 when I filled up at the pump, and I tested these when I got home. So that fresh fuel that I put right into the containers, right in the bed of my truck, it was between E80 and E83, depending on where I filled these to what line, what spot on the line. Because like I said, you can undershoot it or you can overshoot it, or you can go right in the middle. So you have that thickness. So because you have that thickness, is like what? Almost like 3 millimeters here of variation. That's what I'm talking about. So to keep things consistent, I have to do the test If I fill to the top of the water line, I have to fill to the top of the gasoline line and vice versa. And like I said, I got a range from E80 to E83, and the most it can be ever at the pump, as stated on the pump, is E83. Okay, you cannot get higher than E83. You can't get E85, even though it's called E85. At the pump that I went to, I'll show a picture of this, it's between 51 and E83 is maximum. Okay, so that's something worth mentioning, and I wanted to go into some little detail about it because you know, some people say these things aren't accurate. I just think it's the method you are using. So if you're consistent with your method and biasing it against a sensor or some other method, and you know that, okay, if I filter this spot on the line and this spot on the line, it's going to give me a consistent, accurate enough reading for me to run it in my car or to check the fuel, etc. So let's go ahead. I'm going to start pouring some fuel into these containers and see how they do. All right, so here are the water lines. I tried my absolute best to get these on a level surface as well as filling exactly where there should be. And what I discovered is that this one has to be filled up differently than the wide mouth. So the REV-X, you have to go to the center, okay, to the center of these two blue lines. You want to use the dark blue because there's a light blue and then there's a dark blue. And then on the wide mouth, you want to go to the top of the blue line, okay? And you're going to ask me why and how I know that. Well, very simple. What I did was take a set of digital calipers here, and I measured the scale, okay? I went center to center on each one of these hash marks, and you're going to get a value, whatever it is. In this case, it's 159 thousandths and 5/10. So let's just go with that because that's what it was for the wide mouth. So the wide mouth, each graduation is 160 thousandths. Okay, let's just round that number up. So when you line it up with the E5 percentage, that lands you to the top of the dark blue line on the bottle. Okay, if you can see that. And that's exactly where I'm lined up. And in the case of the REV-X bottle, when you measure each graduation center to center and then you plot it back to the origin line, which is this blue, dark blue line, which has two lines in it, that dark blue line, it's the center of that line. Okay, so it's essentially center to center on the REV-X. This one here, you want to start at the very top of the dark blue line, water line. So two different methods on filling this up, and that, without a doubt, that's the way you're supposed to do it, okay? From what I see, we're going by the scale, and we're using the scale to basically dictate our origin. And if you measure it out, that's what you get, okay? You got to go to the center of the blue line on the REV-X and the top of the blue line on the actual wide mouth Amazon e-content tester, okay? But let's go ahead now and fill up with fuel. And let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so home stretch, guys. Before I go and shake these up and see what they read at, I want to show you guys what the fuel lines look like and what I discovered. So I discovered that the REV-X bottle, the graduations in the fill lines are equidistant. So I fill up to the center of the water line, I fill up to the center of the gasoline line, okay? So you have to use that as your indicator. Center to center, equidistant. The wide mouth Amazon bottle, not equidistant. So like I said before, you have to fill to the top of the water line, and that's dictated by the graduation length. So that 160 thousandths, when I plot it, when I start on the E95 here line, it actually plots out to the bottom of this red line here, okay? So that's the bottom of the red line, which is the fuel fill or gasoline fill line. So not to the top. That would throw off your readings according to this, okay? Because, like I said, that measurement of 160 thousandths in this case takes you from the bottom of this blue line to the next graduation, to the next graduation, and so on until you get here. And then the next graduation after the E95 is going to be technically E100, okay? And that would be the bottom of this red line. So two different methods you have to use with these bottles, I've discovered. And I didn't discover that until just right now, okay, doing this video. So we're learning as we go here, which is great, because we're doing like a scientific kind of thing. We're measuring, and we're measuring the scale length, and then we're plotting it and seeing what is accurate. So now let's go ahead and shake these up and see what the results are. All right, guys, so 25 minutes later, I let these guys settle out the best they can. I do notice that there are still air bubbles in here, so that will affect the measurement. So it's going to drop it once all the air bubbles settle out. But it's been 25 minutes. I mean, I'm not going to wait any longer. And the car is reading E72. We have E75 on both of these. Okay, they're both reading the same, which is good, because it means that the method I used to, fill both of these bottles are consistent, and they're biasing to each other. So they're correlating to each other, which is great, but they're reading higher than the car. The car is getting E72 from the flex fuel sensor, which is reading it directly into the ECU. There's nothing else, other factor in the way. So we're relying on the calibration of the flex fuel sensor and how that reads, okay? Also, something I noticed during this process on both of these, the reason why I think people say they could not be accurate is because it's been 25 minutes, going on almost half an hour now, where I let these things sit here on a level surface, and there's still a bunch of air bubbles in here, and I've been tapping on them. I kind of like tap them on the tabletop here to get them to settle out, but those air bubbles that are still in there will not move. Those air bubbles affect the gauge line that we're using as an indicator to read the measurement, okay? So as those air bubbles release and come to the top surface, that gauge line that we're using, that threshold between the two fluid layers, that separation line, will drop, okay? So if it doesn't drop, we're gonna get a higher reading, because we know there's air bubbles inside the bottle. So that's one factor. Another thing I noticed is that the actual fluid volume dropped on both of these, exactly the same. I have no idea why that would be. These things were tight, nothing leaked out. I shook them up, nothing oozed out or anything. They're brand new bottles, they're nice and tight, they have a good seal. If anybody knows why the fluid volume drops, as you can see here, let me zoom in, it basically just it dropped like a couple millimeters on each bottle from the actual end point where I filled the gasoline line. Like I said, I filled it to the center of this green line up here, and I filled it to the bottom of this red line on the wide mouth, because there's two different methods how you have to, fill these containers up, okay? So, but they drop down the same amount of shift. I have no idea why that is. Where does the volume go? Is it gassing out? But it's not gassing out into the room, because I have caps on them. Where's the volume going? Okay? After you first shake these things up, there is some pressure in there, and I tend to relieve the pressure, open the cap, and just bleed it off, okay? Because I don't want that pressure pushing on the fluid. Or maybe I should be leaving the pressure in there, but it was slowly leaking out of this bottle, because there's so much pressure built up in the head of it that it was like actually leaving the bottle itself. It was just like, I could hear it hissing out. So if anybody knows why that is, why the fluid level drops after you shake it, builds that pressure in there, it does some kind of reaction, and then the fluid level just drops a little bit, a couple millimeters. But anyways, both bottles are reading E75. We have a discrepancy. We have a discrepancy of a count of 3, because the car is reading E72. So you can take that for what it is. It's kind of close to what the reading is. It's good that the ethanol sensor in the flex fuel sensor in the car is reading low, because that would be conservative. That way, when it applies the timing table, when it has ethanol in there, it does it on the more conservative side, and on the safer end of the threshold. If you have different thresholds for percentages for E content, depending on how much you want to ramp up that timing. So it's a good thing that it's lower, and maybe they did that on purpose. They calibrated it to measure lower, Or it could just be a combination of this still having air bubbles in there and not fully settling out, and it might take 4 hours or even a day for this to settle out. I don't know. I'm going to keep these things here for a while now, and I'm going to check back on them, but I doubt they're going to go down like to 72. Okay, they might go down to, down to 74 if anything by the amount of bubbles I see in here, but I don't think it's going to go down to 72. So it's kind of close, 72, 75, but the bottle is reading higher, both of them. So my method worked because, like I said, both bottles are reading 75, which is, I was correct in my speculation on the graduation length. But now talking about the bottles, I think I prefer the REV-X bottle, okay? Even though it doesn't have a wide mouth, I just think I like the scale better, okay? Because the scale, the center to center thing and the equidistant thing is better off, I think, than just having to remember you have to fill this to the top and fill that one to the bottom of the red line, okay? That's a little bit harder to remember than this right here. It's center to center, okay? You don't have to worry about anything. And I like how the lettering, the E85, E90, is in the center of the graduations. That allows you to make subtensions out of the letter E. So the middle of the E, that dash mark, is essentially a half subtension between the two larger graduations, those large black lines, okay? So that helps me kind of read off, okay, this is at, E72.5, because I know it's in between both of those subtensions on either side, okay? The graduations on either side, I should say, the larger ones. So it just helps me read off better in when it's in between the two lines, what it is. This one, and not so much, you have to guess more, okay? Even though it is kind of, the scale is nicely labeled on here, nice thin lines, which allows you to thinly or accurately read the actual gauge line, it still is not as good, I think, as the the REV-X. So I think the REV-X in my book is the winner when it comes to reading. It's reading a touch closer than this is here. This is right on the line. This is right below the line, okay, when it comes to that gauge line for the separation line. But I'm going to put the link for both of these in below the video in the description box. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. Let me know what you think about this kind of weird shift in the volume of, on both bottles. What that is, I have no idea. It's just I always notice it when I'm measuring ethanol content, but it's just something that I noticed. So these two bottles I will link in the description box below, the Amazon link to the exact models I'm using here, and if you're interested in them, you can purchase them. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Let me know what you think, if you have any questions or comments, and how you go about measuring ethanol or your technique, and if maybe I missed something that you know about that I should know. Place it down in the comments down below, and I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.